All right, well, welcome here, everybody, for this class on derivative houses, the whole world in one chart. I am, of course, your host, April Elliott Kent of BigSkyAstrology.com. I doubt there are too many people here that don't know me, and perhaps not many that have not been in on one of my classes. But if this is the first time you're here, welcome. Happy to have you here for the live class. And I find this topic delightful, and I hope that you enjoy it as well. So a little housekeeping before we get started. I'll ask you to please keep your microphones muted because just the least little background noise, if you amplify it 20, 25 times, it can start to get pretty noisy. But use chat to add a question or a comment. And you probably all know, just hover over the bottom of your Zoom screen and look there for chat and type your question in there. You can send the question just to me directly or to everybody in the group. Stephanie, the lovely Stephanie, is assisting me in this class, and she will be monitoring the chat window. She'll let me know if we need to stop the show and answer a question. There will be moments for everybody to just chime in, and for that, it might be best to use the raise hand function, which I think I tried to find last time, and I had a hard time finding it. Stephanie, do you know where that is offhand on the Zoom?
Yeah, on my screen it's at the bottom and you can see like a little heart and it says react. And then you can like hit a button that says raise hand.
Oh, how interesting. I don't actually have any of that on mine. But hopefully all of you, oh, reactions. You can also find it on mine. It's on the little Zoom bar. I don't know if you're seeing my Zoom bar, but at the far right, there's the three dots and then more. And if I click on more and I go down to reactions, then I have the raise hand. So that's how you might find it. All right. Oh, and the recording replay link will be sent out no later than Monday, maybe earlier, but I wouldn't count on it, by noon Pacific time. Okay, so what we're going to cover today are what are derivative houses, or as I accidentally wrote it on a couple of emails, derivative. I don't know what was happening to my fingers. How the technique is useful in a practical sense, types of derivative houses, and a lot of examples of this technique in use. So what are derivative houses? So a typical chart takes the order of the houses from the ascendant. Or in the case of whole sign system, the 0 degree of the ascendant. But that is the usual way that we order the houses in the chart. Derivative houses order the houses based on something other than the ascendant. And the order of the signs on the houses then is relative not to the natural ascendant, but another house or planet or point. So the chart we're looking at here is the regular, I think, Koch houses, has 19 degrees Sagittarius rising. And then the second house has Capricorn, third house Aquarius, and so forth. So that's the normal way we order the signs. But derivative houses use something else as that reference point. So how they are useful. They describe conditions related to people in a client's life without referring to that third party's chart. Some of you have had readings with me or seen my questionnaire or whatever, my website, you know, I don't read the charts of third parties without their written permission, which is not normally something people will ask for or give. And they, I will make an exception in the case of minor children if I'm speaking with their parents. But normally I feel it's an invasion of privacy, so I don't do it. On the other hand, clients very naturally have important questions about the other people in their lives and what is going on with them. Derivative houses has been a fantastic system for me to be able to talk about those relationships without having to violate anybody's privacy. So it's really helpful. It's also a way of getting specific about multiple people in a client's life that have the same job description. So they have more than one sibling. They have more than one neighbor. They have more than one house, more than one job. And astrology, it can be a little bit difficult to ascertain these kinds of differences. Derivative houses are very useful for this. You can distinguish between the first sibling, the second one, the third, and so forth. And the same with children and all kinds of relationships in a person's life. The reason they work, and I was talking to my friend about this, and she said, well, how do you possibly do this? How do you possibly talk about a person in someone's life without looking at that person's chart at all? And I say, it's because derivative houses reflect the client's experience of the person or the situation. And it really does work most of the time. I want to give you an example of a derivative house system or technique. And it's an example every one of us has been exposed to. And it's the case of sun sign horoscopes. What an astrologer does when they're preparing a sun sign horoscope is to place a sun sign on the first house of a whole sign house system chart. And then what you do is you order each subsequent house cusp with the subsequent signs in order. So if you're writing about Gemini, you put Gemini on the first house, and then Cancer would be on the second house, Leo on the third, and so forth. So those houses are being derived from the sun's sign. Then you read the planetary placements relative to that sign. This is a really helpful technique when you don't know a natural ascendant. So if you're writing for a broad cross-section of people that you don't know, then you don't know their ascendant. So this is a good way to do it. You can also use this technique to some extent when you do not know an individual's birth time. And the reason it will work is because the sun is such an important and influential planet. It's the center of our whole solar system. Without the sun, nothing. We die. So the sun is incredibly important. And what it does is describe situations relative to that person's ego, their sense of self, their sense of being kind of the center of their little universe. So they actually, if they're done well, can work to a certain extent a lot of the time. Here's an example of a sun sign horoscope for Capricorn. Let's say I was going to talk to a Capricorn or write about a Capricorn person for the coming week. And this is by no means everything coming up this week. It is the busiest week ever. But let's say, so here's a Capricorn house. It's got 0 degrees Capricorn on the first house, Aquarius on the second, Pisces on the third, and so forth. And the whole sign system is just 0 degrees of each sign on each house cusp, which is why it's perfect for this technique. So this week, for example, we have on October 28th, Mars in Cancer is making a trine aspect to Neptune in Pisces. What does this mean for Capricorn? Well, Mars in Cancer shows up in the 7th house for this sign, and Neptune is in the 3rd house. So then the astrologer has something to go by. They can say, well, maybe you're having a conflict with your partner this week over some kind of communication issue. 7th and 3rd houses. On October 28th, again, there's Venus in Sagittarius is square Saturn in Pisces. Venus would be in Capricorn's 12th house and Saturn in Pisces in Capricorn's 3rd house. These are solar houses. So what we have is, a desire for freedom and fun and adventure puts you in conflict perhaps with Saturn in Pisces that says, Saturn in the 3rd house. Well, today you have a full schedule. There are all these things you need to do. While Venus and Sagittarius in the 12th house is just wanting to retreat from everything and relax. So you start to get the idea of how you can work with a system like this. And if you've ever wondered how astrologers come up with horoscopes, this is how. Any reputable astrologer, this is exactly the way they do it. The new moon at 9 degrees Scorpio on November 1st falls in the 11th house, and so on. I don't know why I made that animation work, but it's kind of fun. I'll show another one of those later. We were talking before about turning the wheel. But if you wanted to talk about someone's home life, Capricorn's home life this week, you could take the 4th house and put it up to the 1st. There is also, and I'm not going to go way deep into this, first of all, because I don't know a lot about Hellenistic astrology, but it is also another way we'll commonly see derivative houses used, is you'll put the part or lot of fortune, especially, on the ascendant, and then you'll derive all of the houses from that. So here is a chart. This is my chart, actually, where I put my part of fortune, which is in late Virgo. It's at 29 Virgo. On the 1st house with whole sign houses. So again, in whole sign, you take 0 degrees of the sign in question, which is here, Virgo. You put that on the 1st house, then the next sign on the 2nd, and so on. So this is one you can do. If you're using Solar Fire and you want to use this technique, under house system, you choose whole signs fortune, and that will make the part of fortune be the reference point. This just happened to be some transits with this chart for me on the day I released, I think, my 2nd book. And Jupiter had just moved into the 9th house of this chart. Mercury was sitting right on the moon in Gemini, writing. The moon was sitting on the North Node, which is in my natal ninth, all kinds of stuff. So it's, they use it apparently was a diacal releasing technique, which again is not one that I work with. But just in case there's anyone out there who does and wants to play around with this is apparently a way that is a derivative house system that's commonly used for those kinds of techniques. But what we're really going to be working with today are derived houses, which derive from the house of the matter, which becomes the 1st house. So if you want to talk about, someone's talking about moving and they want to see how that will work out, you place the house and sign of the matter, in this case, the 4th house, on the ascendant. And that was the animation. So that brought the 4th house to the ascendant. It has the moon there appropriately, opposed Pluto. They're probably not seeing eye to eye with their spouse about this. And both of those are square Mars on the 10th house of this rotated chart, which could mean, yeah, maybe somebody has to take a new job. And that's why this is even an issue, but they're not on the same page about it. So, for multiples of the same kind of relationship, so say you want to talk about a specific sibling in someone's life, the house of siblings generally is the 3rd house. So for the eldest sibling in the family, they get the 3rd house. So we have there. The 2nd sibling, unless it's yourself, you begin with that house, 3, and you count 1, 2, 3. And that's the 2nd sibling. To get the 3rd sibling, you start with that house. On that cusp, 1, 2, 3, and you have the 3rd sibling, and so on. Nobody seems to know the source behind this count to 3 technique. It's how I was taught. It's how I've always used it. John Marchesella, who's an astrologer in New York, I think he's with NCGR, has said that he uses this technique because it brings together things that are alike, like a sibling. So you don't just do this with sibling relationships. For example, if you want to talk about marriages, somebody's married more than once, you start with the 7th house, the house of marriage. And for the 2nd sibling, you start there and you count 1, 2, 3. That's the 9th house for the 2nd marriage. If they get married again, 1, 2, 3, and there's the third marriage. And if it's Elizabeth Taylor or somebody, you just keep going around and around the chart. But the idea that John Marchesella had was children, for example, if you have more than one child, there's the fifth house, 1, 2, 3, second child, 1, 2, 3, third child, and so on, that they have a kinship. And that's true of siblings, of course, kind of true of children, they are siblings. And with the partners, I don't know how to explain that one other than they have something in common and it's you. So that is where this came from. Dr. Lee Lemon has talked about this technique. She does not really use it because she could never find the origin of it. But for all intents and purposes, and this is the way I'll be using it today, it's a handy way when you have more than one sibling, more than one child, more than one spouse or whatever, to distinguish between them in the chart. Now, I thought what I'd do is just do a quick review of the meanings of the houses of the horoscope. Because again, we'll probably have all kinds of levels of people on this call. And it might be helpful to just go through, and especially in the context of this kind of work, some of the ideas for the 12 houses. Beginning with the first house, this is a house of beginnings. It's a house of individuality, of the physical body, specifically the safety of the physical body, and the fact that the physical body is the thing that separates us from being anybody else. The style of interaction. So we'll often hear the first house described as being a house of personality, and coping with unfamiliar or even perilous situations. The second house is a house of money, possessions, other resources that you possess. It is also about the physical body. It's a little bit more about the way we experience the world with our physical body. So it's very sensory, very sensual. It is about specifically earnings, so money that you get by earning it. Security and confidence are also associated with the second house. The third house is a house of siblings and of neighbors, of school and learning, of short trips. And I usually just think, okay, if you don't leave the ground to get there, so a car or a train or a bus, it's a third house experience. Transportation like cars and communication. A fourth house, home and family. One of your parents, and there's not a real consensus on this. We know that the parents are represented, one in the fourth house and one in the 10th house, but there's not a hard and fast rule. What I do when I'm speaking with a client is describe one of those houses, the sign, any planets in there, and say, is that more like your mom or your dad? And then we know which parent is in which house. There was, I'm trying to think where I read it, but the idea was that for women, the mother is the 10th house, and for men, the father is the 10th house. And that it kind of does seem to work a lot of the time, but I still sort of talk to the individual about their parents. Anybody who's sharing your home with you is a fourth house person, a roommate or a foster child, whoever it is, qualifies under the fourth house. It's the house of endings. And for example, if you want to know when a job was going to end, you could begin with the sixth house, count to 4, and that's the house that describes the ending. And ancestors, so that the people who brought us to this point on the planet. The fifth house is a house of children, and in particular, the firstborn child. Lovers, people we date, romantic partners, creative hobbies, self-expression, and games and fun and recreation. The sixth house is connected with your job, your coworkers, and your employees. It's a house of health, and in particular about the way our routines influence our health and well-being, because it's also the house of daily routine. And it's a house of pets. I know Elliot is on this call, and in another class that we had, we were talking about a pet situation for her. And we always wonder in astrology, are pets represented by the fifth house because they're like our children? Or are they the sixth house, which was traditionally the case because they're small animals, which is connected to the sixth house. And usually they were animals that had jobs. So all I can say is whenever I've had a big incident in my life concerning pets, I adopt one, one passes away, one develops an illness, I always see the transits affecting my sixth house and its ruler, not the fifth house. Seventh house, other people in general. If you get a question from somebody that is something like, how did Greg's job interview go? And you don't have any other context. Greg, we know, is just another person that is not you. This happens more often, of course, in horary, where you're asking a question and reading the chart for that. But it comes up a little bit sometimes in my, natal work as well. Partners, and in particular, a spouse, your very closest friends, your open enemies or competitors. Competitors is usually a word that's more palatable to people. We don't like to think of ourselves as having enemies. And, but if you and another person are going after, say, the job of President of the United States, and only one of you can hold that job, you are competitors. In that sense, your seventh house figures to each other. The eighth house is about intimacy and sexuality for sure. It's about shared resources, including finances. It's about estates and taxes and inheritance. I will get questions like that sometimes from people, and that's an eighth house question. And also mortality and life-threatening illness. The sixth house tends to be a little less critical for health than the eighth. If you see things piling up in the eighth house connected to a health issue, it's probably pretty darn serious. The ninth house is about your philosophy of life, your religion, your sense of the big picture. Clergy, not so much a big factor for us in this day and age, but for some people. Higher education, including professors, publishers. I'm a writer myself, so I tend to attract a certain number of writers as clients. They're often asking questions about how to approach a particular publisher, or will my book get accepted? And the ninth house is important there. Long distance travel, travel professionals, and foreign people. So people in another country or born in another country are all under the ninth house. The 10th house will be about your career path specifically, but also about what you see. I get this question increasingly these days: what is my purpose in life? And I think we see a lot of that in the 10th house, not all of it, but I do think it's part of the picture, because the 10th house really says, what am I here to contribute to the outer world? So career is one way we do that. Authority figures are represented by the 10th house. If somebody's having an issue with their boss, that's where I'm going to look. One parent, the parent that's not in the 4th house, is represented by the 10th house. Your reputation and any recognition you hope to achieve. The 11th house includes friends who share your interests. We call it the house of friendship, but it's a little misleading. The 7th house is more appropriately your very close friends of the heart. If you're talking about a best friend, that is the 7th house. The 11th house would be the people in this class today. We, hopefully those who have encountered each other on a regular basis in these kinds of classes, have a fondness. But really, it means we share an interest in astrology. And if you go to your local astrology group, it's the same thing. If you go to the local mycological association, you're with a bunch of people that like mushrooms, just like you do. Community is seen in the 11th house. And if somebody is working on community projects, they're part of a board or something like that, the 11th house is very important. Plans for the future in general, and other people's children. So the 5th house is your children. The 11th house is other people's children generally. And this especially comes up for people who have adopted children, or in some cases work in, I had a co-worker, my co-host on the podcast initially, who founded a nonprofit to place older foster children into adoptive homes. And she had everything in the 11th house. So these are the kinds of things that can come up with the 11th house. And then the 12th house. The 12th house symbolizes where we retreat from daily routines. It is a place of recovery from illness, from trauma, from healing. If I'm seeing a lot of planets in the 12th house, in the derivative house system, I know that somebody has really gone through something and they're healing from it, whether physically or emotionally. It represents hidden matters, denial, and spiritual advisors, as well as just generally seclusion, times when we want to be alone. Here is a little wheel that I made with a few of the major keywords. And when I send out the link for the replay on Monday, I will give you a link to download this as well, so that you have it handy if you're working with a chart, you have it sitting next to you in case you get stuck. Do we have any questions
Yes.
at this point? Okay.
Yeah, we have a bunch of them actually. I'll start off with a compliment. Melody Ann says, I highly treasure your workbook from 2016 on Saturn and the progressed moon phases.
Oh,
So that was the
wonderful.
first one. Elliot asks, sorry, are solar houses the same as whole sign? I was thinking solar houses are when the sun is on the ascendant.
Yeah, the solar houses are, I didn't include them because most software doesn't. But what you would do is use the degree of the sun on every house cusp. But when you're doing a horoscope, what you're generally gonna do is just use that 0 degree of each sign.
But for this technique, we're just using whole sign.
For this technique, we're gonna use whatever house system you want. I was just talking specifically about if you're doing a horoscope, because in that case, you don't know the person. So you have to kind of default to the most general house system.
Okay, I was just getting my signals crossed. I really
That's
appreciate it.
perfectly fine. I'm glad that you let me clarify that for you.
And actually, Catherine had asked that question too. They asked the best house system for this. I think it's whenever you were talking about one of your lots, like your lot of, like that part
Right,
of
the lot of fortune and things. For the basic work I do, I use, unless a client specifically asks for another house system, I use Koch houses because that's my preferred lens. And I use that for this system as well. I'll address this in a few minutes, but basically, there are some house systems that belong with certain techniques. If you're working with a Hellenistic system, like zodiacal releasing or annual perfections, I think it's right to use whole signs because that is the system that developed along with those techniques. So even though I'm not a real whole sign person, if I were working with perfections, I would use whole signs. But for this technique, you can use any house system you want and it works perfectly fine.
And
Anything
then
else?
Maureen, yep, I have quite a few questions. Maureen asks, I have twin brothers who were born minutes apart. Do I still count 3 houses over for them?
You sure do. One came first, as they will be very hasty to tell you. So the first one is the 3rd house, and the second one would be 1, 2, 3, the 5th house.
And then Rahima asks, sorry, kind of confused. The slide says 2, but hearing count to 3.
Yes, because you start with the house you're on. So if you're talking about siblings, the third house is generally siblings, and it's also the first sibling. To get to the next sibling, you stay on that house cusp, the third. 1, 2, 3. And that takes you to the fifth. Rahima, did that help?
Yes, thank you so much.
Good, okay.
And then Maureen asks, so you count 3 starting with the house you're on for every subsequent sibling, child, spouse, etc. Just checking. 3 houses
Yep.
for each category is the same? Question mark.
What was that last question?
3
last part of
houses
it.
for each category is the same? Like, I
Yes.
think that the 3 is just for siblings though, right? Like
No, it's siblings, it's children, it's spouses, it's bosses, it's whoever in your life you have more than one of, or have had more than one of. So for example, if you have, say, I had 4 siblings starting out, but one has passed away, he's still counted in the wheel. And also, somebody asked me about an adopted sibling. And the question is, who was in the family first? Was it their oldest born sibling, or was it the adoptive sibling? Maybe they were there first before the other children were born. So it's the first sibling in the family, basically. Starts with the third and then all the way around.
Catherine just asked also if the sibling died. I think I think April just answered your question. Or
Yeah.
did you?
And you take yourself out of that rotation. So if you're the second sibling, you're not going to count yourself as the second sibling. You're going to count your oldest sibling, 1, 2, 3, and that's the sibling just younger than you in that case. And so on. So you don't include yourself in the sibling order here.
And then KJ asks, can you briefly explain why the second marriage is the 9th? How many houses from the 7th are we considering?
Yeah, so you start with the 7th, 1, 2, 3. And then the 9th house becomes the second sibling, marriage partner, spouse, and so on. And I will say, I never, ever use this consideration. To me, the sibling is the sibling. If they're talking about their current sibling, I'm not worried about whether it's their first one, their second, or their third one. But some people do. And so I'm including it here. And you might find it very descriptive. Hope that answered that one. So it's the
And then-
1, 2, 3 for everything that is the same.
And then Anahit asks, if one's midheaven is in the 9th house, would that override 10th house indications of career path or involve a combination of themes from both houses?
I imagine it's both. I don't use the whole sign system or equal houses, and that's the only situation where that arises. Stephanie, you might have insight into that. You work with whole sign.
Yeah, it's a combination of both houses.
Yeah, I think it would give an extra edge, an extra dimension to the idea of your career or your calling.
So if there is an adoption, you would go by when the person came into the family or their birth?
I would go when they came into the family.
Okay, and I do charts on animals.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be a similar thing with the animal when the animal was adopted or rescued. Okay,
Right.
great.
And the
Thank
one
you.
that came, like we adopted our cats on the same day, but one of them came home first. So she gets to be 6. And then
Exactly what I was asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
so clear. I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate your clarity.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. I don't always feel like I'm getting right to the heart of it, but you guys are asking good questions.
And we have a few more questions. Rahima asks, regarding 6th house health, this encompasses all types of health, correct? Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual.
Yes.
Okay. And then Angeline asks, are my grandchildren in the 11th?
We have
from,
a whole
Mary.
thing about grandchildren. It gets a little more specific than that. Generally, you can lump, it's like you can lump all siblings in the third house. But you can get very specific about them by counting 1, 2, 3 and going around the wheel. The same is true with, say, grandchildren, because a grandchild is a fifth house from the fifth house. So this is your child, the fifth house. You count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get to their first child. But generally, you can't just use the 11th house. But I wouldn't. I'd probably get more specific about it.
So we have 2 more questions. Tracy asks, so second spouse is count 3, not 7.
Correct. Yeah. If you're talking about your ex-partner's partner, then you would go 7 from 7. So let's say you've gotten divorced, you have not remarried. So the 7th house is still kind of your spouse, even though it's an ex-spouse. And if you want information about their current partner, then you count 7 from that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they probably
no,
married
you're
somebody very
frozen.
much like you. So, yeah.
You're frozen, April.
Oh no. Oh no. I don't know what to do.
Oh, it was frozen on my end. Now you're fine. Now you're fine.
Okay. Okay, good. Good deal.
Oh, maybe it was my internet. I'm getting a thing that my internet connection was
Oh,
unstable.
I hope it's
Anyway,
not
I have
mine.
one more question.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I have one more question from Melissa. They ask, if first child died, does second count as 1 or 2?
2. Because they were born second. And there's always that phantom, you know, of the little fifth house child that left. So they're there. It's so interesting when you lose a member of your family, how much they are still part of the family unit and the dynamics. So yeah, I'd leave them in.
And then I had a question just came in. Tracy would like book recommendations would be great.
I've got those at the end.
Okay.
You will find them useful.
And that's it.
Okay, well, we will move along then. And here are a few general examples. So for example, if you want to find your child's job in your chart, the first thing you do in a situation like this is you begin with the primary matter or person. In this case, it's your child. So that's the fifth house. We haven't gotten specific about which child, just child. So that would be the fifth house. And then from that house, count the number of houses to reach the secondary matter. In this case, the job. And jobs are related to which house? Anybody want to take a crack at that?
6,
6.
maybe
So-
10.
Yeah, well, 10 is career. So if we're talking job is a little different than career. So I make the distinction. So to find the child's job, you begin with the fifth house and you find the sixth house from that. So you start on 5 and you say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And funnily enough, the 10th house signifies the child's job. So you would read the sign on that cusp. You would read, if you're in whole signs, what house the midheaven falls in. You would read any planets there, any transits, and that would tell you about your child's job. I get these questions all the time. Oh, my son has been out of work forever. When will he find a job? And this is where you would look for that. How to find your brother's girlfriend. Which house rules siblings? Anybody?
Third house.
Okay. So that's the primary matter. And which house rules romantic relationships?
Seventh.
The 7th is an actual committed relationship.
Okay, so then fifth.
Yeah. So you would begin with the 3rd house and count to 5 to find the girlfriend. So you start here, And in fact, let me laser pointer. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as it happens, your 7th house signifies your brother's girlfriend. It's a little confusing, but there it is. So that is what you would look to for information about, do I like this person for my brother? Then how do you find your brother's girlfriend's income? Begin with the 7th house because that's the brother's girlfriend. And then you count to 2. That's the house that signifies specifically income. Yeah?
Eu já sei que você quer vir.
What's
Quer
that?
vir?
I didn't hear that. Or I heard, but I didn't understand.
Olha isso, ó. Você quer abaixar? Opa.
Oh, I think people are talking in the background.
Yeah, I
Um,
just muted her. I think she was
okay.
having a
And there, so you count 1, 2, and the 8th house of your chart signifies your brother's girlfriend's income. Why you would need to know about that, I'm not really sure, but it's just to show anything's possible. What do we think about how she is with her money and her income? Do we have the slightest idea? What would Aries be like when it comes to money? Any thought?
Impulsive.
A little impulsive, maybe. Yeah, they really go after what they want and they get it. What is the planet that rules Aries?
Mars.
Okay,
Maybe
so
she collects race cars.
maybe it's Mars in Cancer conjunct Saturn in this chart, and it would be in her 5th house. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So she probably, it may be cars for sure. She might be one of those real kind of saves it persons because of Mars with Saturn. But it could also be a thing of like real impulsive and then regret when we hit the Mars Saturn. So anyway, it's just to show you a way you can drill down just a little bit more and get more messages about this person. If you're wondering, is she just after my brother for his money? I would doubt it. You know, Mars and Saturn in Cancer usually will save a bit. So anyway. Find this woman's 4 children. So who is the firstborn child? What house?
fifth.
Yep, 5th house. Just trying to get this out of the way. It's kind of distracting. And then the second born. So we start with the 5th.
7th.
1, 2, 3. How come that isn't? There we go. And the third born.
9.
1, 2, 3, 9. And the fourth born. 1, 2.
11.
Yep. Okay. So, which of this woman's children do you think got married first?
Second.
Yep. With Libra there on the cusp. And he actually was a Libra as well. And who is the one who, let's see, is really religious?
Third.
Uh-huh. With Sagittarius on the cusp. And how about the one with the really hot temper who likes sports and had a child first?
The first child.
First one, Elliot says yes. And the fourth born, is the crazy one who lives away from everybody else and is an astrologer, and that's me. So that's how this one worked. So you can see, I mean, in some cases, the signs are actually the same as the children, but not necessarily. But it does describe their personalities and maybe how she would see them and their life circumstances in an uncanny way, I might add. So if somebody is saying, yeah, my firstborn son and my second-born daughter or third-born daughter just don't get along, is there any way I can help? And then you can look at the rulers of those houses and help figure that out. Okay. Come on, you. Okay, here is, so we're gonna talk about this man's only sibling. So which house are we gonna look at?
3.
Yep. So this is his sibling. What house would signify the sibling's health?
Sixth,
The 6th from the 3rd,
yeah.
Not
which would be 1, it's close. I think you start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it ends up being the 8th house is the sibling's health.
Mhm.
Then let's find the house of the sibling's career. So we know the 6th house is health. And which house is career? 10th. So we're going to count 4 more from this because this is health, which is the 6th. So we're going to go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm sorry, it's down here. It's the 6th from that. So that is the person's career. Did I write anything on there? I didn't. So this person's sibling was very musical and very talented. Also had health problems and died pretty young from them. And I'm inclined always to use the traditional rulers of the signs. So for example, Jupiter ruling the health, because Pisces is there. I have to say Neptune kind of suits in this situation too. And so some health issues. Pisces is always a little susceptible to health issues that have to do with either infections, chronic diseases, things that are hard to diagnose, or things that are related to the feet. What are some other Pisces things with health? And generally their health can be undermined quite easily. So they have to really work on their health. And she definitely had a serious health issue. And then the career, they worked together as musicians. And it's very interesting. She was actually a pretty shy person. And she didn't want to be in the spotlight, but was forced into it. Kind of, I'm seeing this Saturn Pluto here in Leo. She would have much preferred to be more behind the scenes. And probably there was a connection. It probably was part of the reason that she became ill like she did. This is the chart of Richard Carpenter, and his sister was the famous singer Karen Carpenter, who died early from anorexia nervosa, which was not well known about at that time. I think she died in 83 or 84. And it made it kind of a household word because people didn't really know about it. So she had a very sensitive, emotional nature, and she developed this terrible eating disorder. And she was actually a drummer. She started out as an excellent drummer, but then of course she opened her mouth and they said, oh my God, this is wonderful. Let's get you out from the drum kit and put you front and center with a microphone. And she just hated it. And you would never know watching film of her. She looked so at ease and lovely and smiling, but she was very uncomfortable in that role. And that's the Cancer on the midheaven, I think, would be disposed to be a little quieter and want to be behind the scenes. But she didn't get that chance. She was forced into the Leo role. So I don't know. Any thoughts or questions about that? I just thought it was an interesting example. There's her moon
Melody
with,
Ann says, I have a different chart for Karen C. I think that was her brother that.
yeah,
that's-
this is her brother's chart because we're doing derivative houses.
Thank you. Now it makes sense. That's
Yeah, we're
thank you.
deriving it from his chart.
I have a few questions. Did you want to take them now or later?
Sure.
Okay. Anahit asks, why don't we count 5 houses forward for each child? Don't we count 3 only for siblings? And I think they're referring to whenever you were talking about your siblings.
Right. If we're talking about children, if we're talking about the child of a child, we will count 5. But if we're just talking about siblings, again, nobody knows the source of this technique where we count 3. But it is true for all people who are at the same level. So a child, and then 1, 2, 3, a second child where they are siblings. But if you want to find out about your first child's child, which we'll do a lot of in a few minutes, then you go 5 from that because they're not at the same level. So it's like when you're counting first and second cousins, you know, you have to kind of drill down. And this is they have the same parents. So with a child of a child, then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I don't know if I'm explaining that really well, except to say that's the technique, and we're not exactly sure why. But there is a distinction between children of a person who are siblings to each other as opposed to a child of a child, if you get what I mean. I hope that explains it.
Yeah, they wrote in chat that they got it. And thanks.
Great.
And then Tayana asked, when a person has 3 daughters and 2 wives, then third daughter and second wife share the same house, which is 9th. How can we see the difference between third daughter and the second wife?
They'll be very similar. They really will. They'll have similar life patterns. Transits that come along that impact that house will have an impact on both of them. And I mean, they're not the same person. And that does happen. And it's a good question, but I think you will actually see some overlap with them in terms of the timing of things, especially. Yeah, good question. Anything
And
else?
that's all I have. Tayana says thank you, and Elliot says this is actually spooky in a way.
Yeah, it is kind of spooky, but it really, that's why I love this so much. And it's so helpful in my work. Because of course people want to know about the important relationships in their lives. But this isn't cheating. This is saying this is how they see it. This is how they experience it through their chart. So we're going to look at derivative houses in action. So the first thing you do, as I said on another slide, is consider the house of the primary matter or person. Then you consider the secondary matter. So if it's your child's job, your child is the primary person, their job is the secondary matter. Then I look at transits and progressions to these houses and their rulers. So the first example I want to show you involves one of this man's siblings. So tell me, if somebody wants to just tell me generally, or maybe put it in chat if Stephanie can tell me what you write, the general importance of siblings in this person's life. What kind of thoughts would you have or ideas? And I wouldn't get too technical, but. Any
Elliot
thoughts?
says they may have held them back in some way, maybe with sharing resources.
They tried. I mean, they're still trying, really. So there is that. What else about siblings, just generally? How important do you think they are in his life?
Maureen says they play a large role in his life. Tayana says fighting with siblings. Another Tracy says play a big role in their life. I see
Yeah.
competition.
Yeah, competition with the Mars makes sense. And yeah, you're all right. And I think that just the fact that it's a very crowded house in his chart, he's got a lot of planets there. It's not always as literal as this, but he's the youngest of 8. So, and you know, and being the youngest, everybody had an opinion about his life and how he led it and picked on him, and they were all brothers except one sister. So he got a lot of grief growing up. But he ended, and they're still to this day, you know, I always call his family my favorite soap opera because every time I talk to him, somebody's doing some crazy thing. And they really are, they have a lot of arguments, as you expect in a big, boisterous Irish Catholic family. So siblings are a big deal to him. And also all of these third house planets opposed Uranus, Pluto, trine Neptune. There's a lot there. And they are really, really important. So I want to talk specifically about his eldest brother. And his eldest brother is represented, of course, by his third house. And I've moved that up to the ascendant. Quick description of this guy based on his personality or whatever as an oldest brother. What do we think? We know he's important because we agreed this was an important house for my friend, and siblings are really important. This is maybe the most important one, actually. What do we think? A couple of key thoughts maybe about his personality or what makes him tick.
He takes
Elliot.
himself seriously.
Yep. Mhm.
And then Elliot says bossy. Emily says huge sense of self.
Very confident. Yeah. Yeah. The consummate older brother and the oldest brother to all the subsequent generations as well. So he's the oldest, and he, the kind of person that everybody, all the nieces and nephews would come to for loans or for advice or whatever. So bossy, yes, but maybe in the best way. And was in the military. We have Mars there as well. And they're just super, super close. So here was an event that happened concerning that sibling, and we've gone back to the regular wheel, but we're talking about this house because it's the oldest sibling. This was an event that happened for the sibling on December 10th, 2021. And if we are talking about the third house, we're talking about the eldest sibling with that house. And that has Aquarius on the cusp, which in traditional rulership is ruled by Saturn, which is in that house. So we have Saturn in Aquarius, which again gives it strength. It's in one of the signs that it rules. These are the transits for that day around the outer wheel. And on that day, Jupiter, for the first time in 12 years, was almost exactly in a conjunction with Saturn. We might think all kinds of things about Jupiter coming together with a planet that signifies a person. What are a couple things we might think of just off the top of our heads? Oh, jumping Jupiter.
Elliot asks, was he in an accident but it turned out okay? And then Melody Ann had mentioned an accident as well.
It wasn't exactly an accident as far as we know, but it was misadventure. And I presume you're thinking because of Aquarius?
No, because of the Mars square.
Oh, because of the Mars. Okay. We'll look at Mars in a minute, but in this kind of chart, we're going to focus first on the planet that rules this house. So Jupiter isn't necessarily in Aquarius. It could be of the nature of kind of an accident or fall or something like that. We'll talk about Mars in just a second.
Did he just bite off more than he could chew or something with that Jupiter?
Well, I don't know about that. I will say he was in Las Vegas at the time. That sounds very Jupiterian. And yeah, you would expect so, travel or something is traveling. He wasn't that far. But yeah, definitely in a place where there's gambling and games of chance and all of that. But here's our Mars. So Jupiter is a very important transit because again, once every 12 years, it makes the conjunction. And the conjunction is probably the most important aspect. So we know, ooh, there is something big on the scene. But Mars is the kind of planet by transit that will trigger what's already sitting there. So Mars, again, forgive me, who was it Melody Ann that was talking about Mars? Or somebody was talking about Mars?
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah. So Mars is almost exactly square Saturn on this day. So we don't actually know. I don't think it was an accident, but it was an acute event, is how we will read Mars. We'll say something happened, as opposed to a feeling or an emotion, or he's talking about doing something big in the future. Mars on the scene says it's happening now. And so we had a Mars event for sure. Here, another huge transit we have going on, Neptune by transit. And this is my friend's chart. This is not the guy who had the event. This is my friend's chart. And this is his oldest brother. But my friend was having transiting Neptune opposed his natal sun. He'll never have that again. A lot of people will never have this aspect in their lifetime. So we know it is hugely important. It's a backdrop aspect that's saying some experience of, well, in this case, I will say the brother died. So this was sadness, grief, and loss. Now, their mother had passed away almost exactly 1 year earlier. And Neptune by transit will have been close to this point for a long time. So he has been already grieving his mother. And then this happened with his favorite and closest brother. Again, the sorrowful planet. It's hard to know sometimes how to read Neptune, but it is on the scene when we have lost something and we're grieving. So we also have Saturn by transit, which is pretty close to my friend's moon, right on his part of fortune. And again, this is an aspect one every 29 years. You get this exact aspect. So big transits really stacking up here. And then we have the Mars triggering it. So yeah, what happened was he was found, collapsed and unresponsive, very close to his hotel room. He had gone to Vegas to see a concert. And I guess we don't know, except he did have a heart attack. So we don't know, the circumstances exactly, but he had a coronary event. And we do have Mars that can suggest that. And we have the sun, which can suggest that, Neptune with the sun. Now, the interesting thing about Jupiter is we always think Jupiter is Santa Claus and he's bringing us great things. Jupiter is on the scene when someone passes away, because what Jupiter wants is to get bigger. And there's no bigger experience than becoming one with the cosmos. So we will often see Jupiter on the scene in these kinds of situations. On the other hand, it could have just been a nice outing to a concert at a casino with Jupiter too. Any thoughts about this or questions?
Emily just asked, did you say it's rare to have Neptune transit conjunct one's exact sun degree?
It's relatively, well, it's as unusual as any of the outer planet transits exact to something in your chart, because they have such long orbits. So Neptune takes 165 years or something to go all the way through the zodiac. So you have to catch it at the right moment when you're born for Neptune to catch up to where the sun is. And that won't happen for everybody. But for him, it started out all the way up here. And at this time, I believe he was 58 years old. And so it took 58 years for transiting Neptune to get down to this point. Yes, Ellie, you had a question?
Yeah, just for practice, was there anything to do with an inheritance from the brothers passing? Just to
Yes.
look at the chart.
Yes. Why are you asking about that?
Because I'm an 8th house baby.
Yeah, and I mean, Saturn is on the moon, and he was named the executor of his brother's estate. He was the brother who was most trusted, and boy, was that a mess because of a few brothers who decided they were the ones that were the least close to him and the most eager to get their hands on his money. So the inheritance thing was big, but my friend's moon rules the 8th house of inheritance and legal matters related to estates and that. And there's the Saturn, he had to take on the responsibility, starting with getting the brother's body back from another state because he lived in California. And apparently it's really complicated. If you die out of state, there are all these considerations and laws about getting you back to the state. So he had to do all of that, sell his house, sell his, all of the stuff. And it was a couple years to get it all resolved. So yeah, good call. Good call on that, Elliot.
Thanks for answering.
Yeah. Okay. So this was a client I was speaking to last week or the week before, and she was, among other things, she's getting ready to retire, kind of young. She's really excited about that. But she has concerns about her father and her brother. And that was the only thing she said on her questionnaire. So I didn't know exactly the nature of these. It ends up she just has one sibling. And after speaking with her, it was pretty clear that her dad was the 4th house parent. What's interesting about this immediately is her brother is the one taking care of their father most right now because they live close to each other and they own a company together. And what's fascinating to me is they both have Leo on the cusp. So they're really connected. So we'll be looking pretty much at the same symbols to read their situations. So there is that. Now, what happened was the father's 92 or 93 years old, but in pretty good shape and still working with the company and everything. But on, I think it was the 11th of this month when Pluto turned direct. I think it was when it turned direct. And on the day one of these big slow moving planets changes direction, you really experience them. On that day, he had a terrible fall. And I don't know how many of you have had elder parents that have maybe been doing great, had a fall and had a really hard time coming back from it. So that's what they're kind of concerned about right now. And his brother already had a lot of responsibility around their father, and now it's getting to be more. And here we have transiting Saturn connecting with at least the progress sun in her chart, and pressure on both of these men because the sun rules the 3rd and the 4th. And what she was basically asking me is, I'm going to be retired, but how important is it for me to get there sooner rather than later? Not just for fear that the father might die, but because the brother is handling all of this on his own. And now there's more pressure there and more responsibility. We have transiting Pluto up here. Of course, it's getting ready to go into Aquarius. Eventually, it's going to oppose the 3rd house cusp, which is the brother. We have Uranus that is squaring the father's house, which is the accident, I guess, that he's had. And also it's Uranus, so we know that's going on for a little while. Both of these are. So I was looking at Mars, our friend Mars, who brings up these things, because Mars is, again, a trigger for bigger influences. But in this case, I thought, Mars is getting ready to have this retrograde where it's going to basically be in these two people's houses for a very long time. It usually would just be a couple months, but instead, on November 3rd, Mars goes into Leo, then it goes retrograde in December, it goes back into Cancer and kind of back in the area it is now. Then it'll go forward and then go into Leo again. And it's there for, I think, a couple of months. And so we've got through June or something. And I'm like, what are the chances that they are gonna need some help critically over the next 6 months? And I thought, I think you want to go. You know, you're leaving your job. You've got a little time. You know, she's in this enviable position. She doesn't have to work for money at this point in her life. And I said, well, go there. Give your brother the help that he needs. Be there with your father because this is critical right now and it's over the next 6 months. So do you see how I got to the timing on that? And if I were just looking at his transits and progressions without thinking about these houses, I don't think I would have gotten there as easily. But seeing those as the brother and the father, seeing this big hairy Mars transit, it's going to be harder on the brother than the father because it's not getting to her fourth house for till like June or July. But her brother's going to need her, is the sense that I get. Any thoughts about this or comments or questions of how I got there?
Yeah, Emily and Elliot, they would like to, can you just go over which chart it belongs to who in this thing?
They are all the chart of my client. So this is her natal chart and her natal houses. In the middle is the secondary progressions, and on the outside, the transits on the day that we spoke. So they're all the same person. Forgive me for not being clearer about that. But so what I'm reading, and then I'm kind of looking at her midheaven up there, which is the, you know, the career and the work. And that's getting ready to change signs, which is pretty important. But it can also be an angle of the parent. And I don't know how to predict death in a chart. I refused to go to class that day. I didn't want to know. But if an angle is changing sign, there is some kind of change that's happening with a person that is naturally represented by that angle. So it's not the mother, but I think it probably is the father, because the progressed IC would be exactly opposite that at 2851 Libra. That will change signs into Scorpio. So I have to suspect 2027 is when that happens. And he's not getting any younger. So I think that's what's going to happen there.
And then Elliot wants to know what house system you're using in this
I'm
chart.
using Coke. That's just my favorite. Everything goes better with Coke. But the angles would not be the same in any of the what we call quadrant-based uneven house systems. In Placidus, in Coke, or in Porphyry, the angles are always the same. But the third house would be different, so that might be interesting. Anything else before I go on?
That's all I have right now.
Okay. So this was, oh, Elliot, this is you. So you'll have to give us some, all I know is there are big changes with your husband's job. I just went in and calculated everything for today. It'll be in the neighborhood of what you're talking about. So tell us a little bit about the situation.
Sure. So, my work and income situation is that, almost 5 years ago, I was struck with a really serious life-threatening illness and haven't been able to work since then. So
Mhm.
I'm currently on disability, which is not a lot, but so that adds significance to his job situation, meaning that we need it more than we would if I was, employed. So his job, he works for a company that's owned by a bigger company. His company is owned by Dell, and
Okay.
Dell has decided to sell that company to some new company. And
Mhm.
meanwhile, his bosses have been in this weird rotational thing for a couple of years. Like he keeps getting new bosses and they're all kind of absentee. And he's a bit underpaid, as is everybody at the company. And now there's this big acquisition. So
Right.
the details.
Yeah. So here is your husband's house, the seventh house. This is your chart with
Mhm.
your secondary progressions and your transits. And so the husband is seventh house, which here is ruled by Venus. So that's going to be important here. Then if we want to find out about Elliot's husband's job, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. His sixth house has Libra on the cusp, which means it's also ruled by Venus. So that's step one to figuring out what's going on. In the backdrop of all of this is this lovely Pluto square that Elliot is having by transit, which everybody gets, about the same time in their life. I can't remember your age right off, but it's between 36 and 42, and it depends on the sign that Pluto is in. So Pluto is in his sixth house. So usually it sits there saying you can work for big, powerful, wealthy organizations, which it sounds like he's done.
Well, and he
Then,
did
yeah,
software security, which I think is funny.
yeah, software security with the Pluto in there. But now Pluto by transit is squaring that. It's done it a few times. Like you said, it's been kind of on and off weird stuff going on, while Pluto has been getting to the end of Capricorn, which has been since, beginning of last year, really, and it's gone back and forth a few times. Pluto, especially in Capricorn, will talk about not just people in power, but people in authority. So it's the bosses and all of that. So that is the big thing going on in the background, Pluto square, which is stressful. And all kinds of things can come up at the Pluto square, but they all come down to the same thing, which they bring us in touch with how little power and control we actually have over our lives. So that is happening right as we speak. What else is happening by transit is Saturn, which is at 13 Pisces. It's retrograde right now. It is square, exactly, Venus in Elliot's chart. And that's in the second house from her husband. So there is a real direct fear here about a loss of income and
Yes.
security, right?
Yes.
So that's happening there. At the same time, here's Elliot's progress moon at 12 degrees Pisces. So she's really feeling it. It's got the feels in this area. So there is this situation going on here. Uranus is also almost exactly on Mercury, which rules, again, the husband's income, because it rules his second house with Gemini there. So changes and roundabouts, as they like to say, where my husband comes from. So what will happen with it? I think, let's look at Mars, because I didn't really look at Mars. Mars doing anything instantly is going to oppose that Mercury. Oh, that's secondary Mars. Forgive me. Here it is. Okay, so you're getting the big Mars retrograde extravaganza that's going to be happening kind of in the 9th and 10th houses while it's going on. That is your career, but it's your husband's home and family. So again, you are more the worry in this scenario, really, than he is, because he's in a situation where he can go out and get another job. He's got Venus on his sixth house cusp. That's never going to be a problem. Little scary right now because of what Saturn's doing. Little scary because of what Pluto's doing. But generally, I think he does okay. But yeah, he's concerned about his family and his home and all of that kind of, his security is what's going on. So I think what we have to do is get past this Mars, which right at this moment is aspecting Uranus and Mercury as well. We have to get past that in June or July, get Mars into Virgo, and I think some of the pressure comes off of that.
Well, and the merger might go through sometime in the spring. So that would be when things might start to shuffle around. You're dead on. You're like
Oh,
nailing it.
yeah, but you can see this is a very powerful technique. I'm not looking at your husband's chart, but it's really clear to see it in yours, especially Saturn with Venus and then Saturn with the sun too. That's a hard 1-2 punch. It's nice to have Venus and the sun together until you get a hard aspect to one, because then you get it to both. So it's a little bit tricky there.
I don't know if this ever matters, but he has a huge Taurus stellium, his natal chart, and a huge Libra stellium. So
Mm,
and that's been a big part of our relationship is day-to-day existence, but also, who's working, who's bringing in money, and where does the money go?
he's not like May
May 3rd.
1981.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when you had everything was in Taurus and Libra. I'm going to show you a person like that shortly. Any other questions about that, Elliot, or does all that make sense? I
So
think
you
get Uranus off Mercury, get Saturn off Venus, get Mars finished with the stuff around your midheaven, which is opposed to his midheaven.
Hmm.
And I think we start to see things settle down a little bit.
So does that first house Mercury, that says that is like a big part of his identity?
Yeah,
Like
I
the-
think anything in the first house, it also talks about your arsenal. So if unexpected things come up, this is the planet you'll rely on. So he's smart, he's bright, he's clever, he can talk well, those kind of things. Uranus there is bringing, big changes, but it can also bring big inspiration when it's together with Mercury.
That's really reflective of because he's had to change who he is and break some bad patterns in order to take care of me. So he's
Yeah.
gone through a lot of personal change. This is really cool.
Isn't it a great system? I love it. Thank you for sharing that example and being open with us. So this is a woman who asked, will I have grandchildren? This is a client of mine, and this surprised me because we'd met before and this never came up. So she only has one child. He's her son. He is in a same-sex marriage, which complicates things a little bit. But this is her child, is the fifth house. To get to his possible first child, how do we get there? We begin with the fifth house.
We count 5?
We count 5 because they're not the same level. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that makes her potential grandchild a ninth house figure. And this is the ninth house is ruled by Scorpio. And the planet that rules Scorpio is Mars, right? So we know if something is going to happen in this area, it's going to need to involve Mars. So it's a little bit, as I say, of an unusual situation because there will have to be a surrogate and all kinds of things involved. Venus is together in that house, very close to Saturn, so there are things that have to be overcome. But what I found exciting when I looked at the chart about how the heck do I tell if she's going to have grandchildren? But Mars, which rules that house, in her progress chart, because this is her natal chart with her progressions, in her progress chart, that Mars has just changed signs. That hadn't happened since 1982. So it strikes me as significant. It's moved into a sign, it struggles in a little bit in Taurus, but it's not the end of the world. It entered there in September, and it's ruling this ninth house. Her progress moon is at 26, almost 27 Aries. It's getting ready to change sign and make a conjunction to that Mars. The moon rules her child, Mars rules his child, and they are coming together. So I thought, well, I think that actually looks really promising. The two of them coming together. And Mars, which just naturally rules the matter in her birth chart, is front and center in her first house. Transiting Saturn has been moving over that point. It's at 13 degrees Pisces. And that would speak of the issue or willingness of taking on a new responsibility in this area. I think she's prepared to do it. Whether he is, we don't really know. But, it's got Venus and Saturn there. So her progressed sun is also going to hit that point in about 3 years. So I told her I'm guardedly optimistic. I wouldn't be at all surprised to hear in a couple of months when that progressed moon moves into Taurus for him to maybe bring that subject up or for them to begin talking about it. Any comments or other observations anybody had about that? But
I
I
don't
just
have
thought it was,
anything in chat right now.
yeah, it's just so marked that something that moves so slowly, like Progress Mars, has just changed sides, and this is the first I've heard her talk about this, and I've read her for several years. Here is somebody whose sister-in-law had to have surgery. I don't know if I'm gonna get to all my examples, but this is a good one. So his sister-in-law, so this is the wife of his only brother. Where do we find the brother? What house?
3,
You got it. So I see here that Neptune is very close to that cusp. And remember what I said before about Neptune being a planet that can say worry, sorrow, grief. So he was already sort of in a state of grief because they lost their grandmother or something. But here's the Neptune hanging around. His wife is, of course, the opposite house, the 9th. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that has got 29 Virgo. She is very 29 Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. So that is going to tell us a lot of the story of what's going on with this surgery. So, get back down here. So let's take this slowly. So this is Mercury in, again, this is a man's chart. This is this woman's brother-in-law, his chart. And Mercury, which is her ruler, is here and is getting an opposition from transiting Saturn. These are the transits. And almost exact too. And at the same time, Mercury is connecting with Mars, the planet of surgery, by transit. And it's coincidentally very close to this man's first house cusp, which often we would look at that transit for him thinking maybe he's having surgery because the ascendant is such a personal point. But he didn't, but his sister-in-law sure did. Now, Mercury, again, an important planet related to his brother's wife, is by transit sitting exactly on Jupiter on the day of this surgery. And it ended up going okay, but it was one of these Jupiter situations where it's a good thing they got in there because they might have avoided a worse problem. The jury is still out, you know. But Mercury with Jupiter can suggest that as well. We've got another Pluto square going on in the background here. And again, not for the brother's wife, but for her brother-in-law, is having Pluto square Pluto. And Pluto is in the house of his brother's wife. So it's part of the Pluto experience that we've been talking about. It puts us in touch with things like, you know, people will get sick around us. Sometimes we lose people around us. It's something that comes up that says you're not totally in charge or in control. So that's the backdrop of this whole situation. The Pluto square, the Neptune transit very close to the brother's house is telling a lot of the story. Now here's an interesting part. So Uranus on this date, almost exactly in a conjunction with the moon. And Uranus is a slow planet. He has an 84-year cycle. And you could conceivably have this aspect twice in a lifetime, but not if you're starting at the age of whatever he is, 40 or something like that. So it's, what I'm saying is it's an extraordinary aspect, and it's connecting with the moon, a woman in his life. But let's see what this house represents for the brother's wife. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And remember that the 8th house is the house of serious illness. So it's not just an outpatient situation. She's going to go in and come out and everything's going to be fine. There at the very least are going to be follow-ups and big things that she's going to have to contend with. This is the chart for Prince Harry. On the date of the surgery of his sister-in-law, Catherine Middleton. So again, it's interesting because, you know, I don't know how much he was sitting around thinking about it that day, but it shows up in everybody's chart in the family. Questions about this one?
I don't have any questions about this chart, but there was a couple of other questions that came in.
Okay, go ahead.
Melissa says, I have 14 grandchildren. Where
Oh,
will I
wow.
look for- I know. Where
Yeah.
would I look for great grandchildren soon?
We
I
can
hope.
find them. We can find them. So let's say, does your oldest child have any children?
Yeah, but they're not gonna have babies.
Okay, how about the second child?
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Okay,
Um,
how about the ones that currently have children? 1, 2.
all my kids except for one actually reproduced. So
Okay,
kids,
okay.
living kids. The first one passed.
Okay. Let's just take the example of one of your children who has a child.
Okay, so that would be child number 2 has a 30-year-old and a 29-year-old.
3, 4, 5. So let's just take the eldest child of the second child. Okay, so your second child is represented here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for their child. So that's the grandchild associated with the second child. Then to find their child, which would be a great grandchild, is that correct? Am I keeping it straight? Would be 1,
Yes.
2, 3, 4, 5. So you just keep counting around the chart, and there will be overlap, like somebody was saying before. You get here's our next question about the birth of a grandchild. So we'll start here, and this might clarify it for you a little too. So this is my sister's chart. Her first grandchild was born on January 25th, 2023. So this is the child of her eldest child. Where do we find her eldest child by house?
And the 5th.
That is ruled by the moon. How do we find his first child? We start there.
5th from the 5th.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is the first child's first child, symbolized by Jupiter. And this was a very happy event in our family. We had had a new addition for a very long time. It was very Jupiterian. But look at the transits for that day. And look at Jupiter, which rules that child almost exactly in a conjunction with her ascendant. So literally this child coming to her life, which I think is really lovely. But if this child goes on to have another child, a child, then you just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's that house. So you just keep counting and make sure you start at the right place, and then you find it. So this child who was born was named after my brother who passed away, and they did it, you know, it's sort of an homage to him. So this is my late brother's chart on the day his namesake was born. So this is the child of his second sibling's oldest child. So let's start with the sibling. So his second sibling is what house? So we begin with the 3rd for the oldest sibling, the 5th. So it's 1, 2, 3, correct. So that's his second sibling. And the second sibling's first child, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then his baby, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in my brother's chart, this child is connected with the first house. And what's fascinating about, there's many fascinating things about this. So that's ruled by Venus. And his natal Venus 29 Scorpio was getting aspects from Saturn and Venus. Saturn is the second sibling's first child, and Venus is the ruler of the child that's just been born. So we're getting Venus stuff kind of colliding here, and that Venus and Saturn are connecting with the moon and Pluto down here. But what was extraordinary to me was on this day, Uranus, which again has an 84-year cycle, it began all the way down here from my brother when he was born and had just gotten all the way around and just crossed the ascendant not long before. And moreover, it's in an opposition to Mercury, and Mercury is the naming planet. So we have the ascendant, the persona of this man who's been dead for many years, getting awakened by Uranus in the form of naming Mercury. We have Mercury again being an important planet because of the naming factor connecting with the north node of the moon, a destiny point, and linking them to each other. So that to me is fascinating. And what was more fascinating was my brother passed away on January 25th, 1995. And we were waiting on January 24th while my nephew's wife was in labor and thinking, will she wait? Will she be able to make it to the next day? And honored him doubly, not just with naming the child after him, but the child was born on the day that he passed away. Pretty extraordinary. But I just love the Uranus connection with the ascendant and Mercury, especially. Do I want to do this one? Yeah, well, okay, so here's my chart for the day my sister had a health crisis. This was 5 days after her grandchild was born. But she is my third sibling. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And she is my third sibling. On this, her health is represented by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 6th house from her, which again has Scorpio there and is ruled by Mars. On this day, Mercury, which rules her in my chart, is here natally in the 9th and is getting a wide opposition from Pluto. It hasn't been there yet, but you start to feel it pretty wide out. So this is something that's saying this could be serious. It wasn't as much as we could have feared. But also Mercury by transit, again, symbolizing the sister, is on that day in a tight trine with Uranus, saying something unexpected happened. It's in her 12th house. Mars by transit on that day, in her house, the 7th house, in a conjunction with the moon, which is a health-related planet, and transiting Neptune at 23 Pisces is opposed Mars, ruler of her 6th house, in my natal chart. So that is some kind of Mars-related illness, probably. And Jupiter, fortunately, was on the scene by transit, making a trine to her ruling planet, Mercury. What happened was she had, it was early on the day of her birthday, she was doing a little work, she became aphasic. She couldn't find the right words for things. And it freaked her out so much, she actually let them take her to the hospital. Ended up, she had extraordinarily high blood pressure. And we see that with Mars here and Mars, and they all rule her 6th house. So they admitted her to the hospital. She was there 4 or 5 days. They had to get her blood pressure down, put her on a course of treatment. So again, lucky Jupiter was on the scene, and lucky that she got in there to get this looked at, because the longer Pluto goes into Aquarius by transit, the closer it gets to an opposition to her ruling planet in my chart. And we could see serious things. So I'm glad she's having that taken care of. Any questions? Is it all getting too confusing or is it sort of making sense? Yes, Elliot.
If okay, so I started using whole sign where I might not. It's whatever the astrology podcast uses, where it's always a zero
Whole
degree.
sign houses.
Okay, it's just so easy to read.
I know.
I mean,
Especially if you use charts from astro.com, which look like the dog's breakfast.
they do. Well,
That is why, this has gotten so popular.
Yeah.
Go on.
does this still work with that?
Yep.
Is that lens too far removed?
No. And
Okay.
in fact, I said, let's see, I'm going to get past these real quick. I don't know if we have. So I use traditional methods for traditional techniques, which this is not in particular. But if I'm using, say, profections or something like that, which is a Hellenistic technique, I will use whole sign houses because those are the rules. But this system works with any house system you care to choose. I guarantee you. Try it both ways, and I think you'll be amazed. I know that's why people like whole sign, because it is, especially, like I said, if you're used to using astro.com and you do not change the default chart style, it is a horrible looking chart. I can't make heads or tails of it. You can go into the settings in astro.com, the additional settings, and you can set the the chart design to something called Anglo, and it will give you a normal looking chart and it is much, much easier to read. I'm not a huge fan of whole sign, but if people like to use it, there's no reason you can't use it for this system. It works fine.
It feels lazy, but it's just so clean. And it's
Well, yeah, again, but all and doubly so because you're using an awful looking chart. And it's much clean. Like if you look at my charts, they're much easier to read than what you've got on astro.com, right? And the 0 degree thing, I know it's the hardest thing. That is the question I got over and over again from people. And I finally did a blog post and a video about it, which is how to find out what house something falls in my chart. If Jupiter is at 13 degrees Taurus by transit, how do I know what house it falls in? Well, it comes after 7 degrees Taurus and it comes before 0 degrees Virgo, Gemini. So I guess it's in the 5th house. But I know it can be a little confusing for people. So again, whole sign, be lazy if you like, if you consider that lazy. I don't particularly. It's trying to, it all kind of works for the purposes of this. Did you get different kinds of insights looking at the question that you brought to the class today if you looked at it in whole sign?
well, that's kind of the worst part is how like I feel like certain like signs that are right next to each other sometimes have a lot of weird stuff in common. So I feel like to me, I imagine it like a photographer trying to take a picture of one event. They might move around that event. And I feel like the position that you're in as the photographer is the house system that you're using.
Absolutely.
I don't know what's accurate and what's not accurate. Do you want to see the front of the dress or the back of the dress?
Well, they're both accurate. You know,
Like-
both photographers are taking a picture of the same thing. You get a different perspective, that's all.
But you can also go crazy.
And I recommend that you do not go crazy. But it's true. It can get very confusing. And it's a question I get a lot from students these days who do tutoring with me, is they're confused because they're out there and they're listening to everybody on the internet. And it's confusing because they're all using different techniques and they're all saying it's the only right one. And they're very confused. And what I tell them is stay with one house system for a couple years. It could be the one that your teacher uses, the one that your favorite podcast uses, whatever it is. Jump on that train and stay with it and get everything you can from it before you move on to the next one, because they will all work. There is no one right one. And I've said this before, I kept a spreadsheet on my desktop for years with my house cusps listed in about 4 different house systems. And if something big would happen, I would look at the transits to see what was being impacted in each of those charts. And not one of them was correct 100% of the time. They were all good most of the time.
I
I'm
needed
like,
this. Thank you.
Yeah, you go with the lens. It's like you're a photographer. You go with a lens that feels comfortable for you, that helps you see what you need to see in the
Mhm.
chart.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
I have a couple of questions, but since we're talking about house systems here, like April and I, we were talking about my boyfriend's relocation chart today, and his MC here is all the way in the 8th house, and I had a hard time seeing it, and I was using a whole sign. I always use whole signs, and sometimes I use
Mhm.
Cope. And so, yeah, I can see how where you're coming from, April. Like sometimes it's like hard to like see things if the MC is all the way over in the 8th house or 11th house or something like that. But I don't.
Yeah, my main problems with whole sign, the first one is most of the work I do concerns relationships and career. And those angles do not fall on the cusps of the 1st, 7th, 4th, and 10th houses in whole sign. And it tricks my eye every time to have to go looking for the midheaven when I'm used to seeing it at the top of the chart, where, in my opinion, it belongs. So that's confusing to me. The other thing that I don't like about it is it's not necessarily, or even usually, a representation of the physical world and the way the sky looks at a given moment. I have seen charts for people who were born at 3 in the afternoon with the sun in the 9th house in any other system, and seen it in the 11th house in whole signs. And that doesn't even make sense, because the 11th house is an entire different time of day, an entire different vibe than the 9th house. So those things bother me about it. But really, I think it's just, I used the other systems for so long, and I just haven't seen the need for me to use those other ones. But when I break down why it bothers me, I think that's mostly it, those two things. But if people like it, I am about to get to the point, though, if people request it in a reading, I think I'm just gonna have to tell them I really don't feel comfortable working with that system. Because what I've done, a couple of people have requested it, but they also describe themselves as beginning astrologers. So I know they're not married to the whole sign system. They're using it because somebody told them they should use it, which is fine. But I asked them, is it okay for this reading? Especially if the chart's not wildly different, if I just do it with my system, and they've always been fine about it. So, but use the lens that works for you.
So
Yeah.
I have 3 questions now. We have Mary Angeline. They ask, are stepkids considered my kids, or is there another way to find them in my chart?
Well, it depends. You could use the 11th house because they're your spouse's child, right? So that would be the 5th from the 7th. So you could do that, and they're other people's children. If they are your children, if you're raising them that way, then I would drop them in there for you as to what order they came into the family. Try both. But you know your relationship with your stepkids, and that's what I would recommend. Hope that helps. What
And
else?
Anna had asked, how do we know which parent is associated with our 4th house versus 10th house in our
Yeah,
natal
it's
chart?
really tricky, and I ask every client, because so many of them need to talk about parental things. And this woman, the woman that I was showing you earlier, where her dad and brother both had, they were Leo on those 2 cusps. I said, there seems to be one parent who was very, very successful, a big personality. And she said, yeah, that was my dad, because Leo's a big personality, and the sun in her chart is in Capricorn square Saturn. So we know that, and he was a CEO. He was a real mover and shaker. And she said he was a Horatio Alger story, which, for those of you who are too young to understand the reference, it is character who pulled himself up by his bootstraps and really made life work for him. So that was her dad. And then we talked about her mom briefly. Mom's no longer with us, a little bit on the zany side. So that Aquarius on the cusp suited her. So I always start by asking, and trying to feel it out. But the rule of thumb that I learned that does seem to work pretty well is for a woman, the mother is the 10th house and the father is the 4th house. And for a man, it's opposite. The father is in the 10th house, the mother's in the 4th house. So Wade Caves, who is a wonderful traditional astrologer, spoke for us here in San Diego one time, and he said that traditional astrologers associated the father with the 4th house because property, which is symbolized by the 4th house, is passed down through the paternal line. Good a reason as any to choose it. But I don't know. There's no hard and fast rule. And I just ask people. I feel it out. Any other questions there?
Yes, Melissa asked, what about my boyfriend's kids?
Well, your boyfriend, depending if you're living together, this is probably a 7th house person. If you're strictly dating, you don't spend time in the same house, that's a 5th house person. So whichever relationship is appropriate there, you start with that house and you count 5 from that. We just put up hopefully that makes sense, but let me get to a chart. So let's say that, let's say he's your boyfriend. You don't live together. You don't share a bank account. Then for his first child, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be house 9. And then if there are more, 1, 2, 3 would be the second one. 1, 2, 3 would be the third. Does that make sense?
Yeah, he's 80 and we have been together 11 years and he lives where he lives and I live where I live. It's very
Okay.
modern relationship.
Do you consider his kids part of your family?
Well, I did, but they decided they don't like me. That's the
Well-
only reason I asked the question, because they just like, whoa.
That sounds very unpleasant. I'm sorry to hear it.
Yeah,
I think under the circumstances, start with a 5th house and count. If one of them's being a particular problem and you really want to think about why and how you can deal with it when it will end or whatever. So in
Yeah.
this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, look at the 9th house, read it. And if that feels exactly wrong, go to the opposite house. Because
Oh, that's a good idea. The opposite house.
so, and yeah, the 7th house is, if you have an understanding, if you have a commitment, it's not required that you share a house. It's not required that you share bank accounts. It's not required to do any of those things. And it's not required that you share children. But is this person your walking one and only? Are you going to be the one to
Yeah.
handle, if he passes away before you, or you the one that handles everything? Then that's a 7th house partner. And then we count from there. And then we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you,
Well, we're not married because my insurance is better than his insurance.
there you go.
But his kids would like to eliminate me
Mm-hmm.
from the movie. And so I don't know. I can read their charts, but
That's how I would do it, is just read your chart. Don't even worry about theirs.
it's a
and,
question
you know-
that comes up in reading charts, not just for me, but most people live together.
Well, but not everybody.
No,
And it doesn't make or break a relationship necessarily. So
no, it makes it better, honestly.
that's what I've heard from the people that do that. Yeah. That it
I have
works really
Aquarius
well.
moon and rising.
There you
See?
go. That works
We-
for you.
Yeah.
That works for you. Were there any other questions, Steph, that we need to look at there?
Emily just put something about playing poker in the chat. She says
Oh.
off topic, but tonight I'm playing poker with some guys in my 4-degree Pisces sun. In the 11th, I guess, will be exactly opposite 4 degrees, transiting Virgo moon, the exact 6 p.m. hour it starts tonight. And
Ooh.
a big 0-degree Jupiter opposite Pluto on my MC going into Aquarius is coming up for me. And I may begin a
Yeah.
job with a very powerful Indian tribe. It feels very Aquarian to go from corporate to Indian mission of regaining land and stability.
Well,
for the
especially because the first degree of Aquarius, the Sabian symbol for it is an old Adobe mission. And that always makes me think of the uneasy and often very unpleasant history between Native American people and the Spanish who came up and founded missions and all that. So yeah, that'll be interesting. I would imagine, Emily, that you'll see yourself involved in this population more and more during that transit. But look, always if you're gaming, look at the 5th house on the evening that you're playing poker or going to the casino or whatever people like to do, because the 5th house is the house of gaming, and money from games is the 6th house because it's the 2nd house from the 5th. So games are in the 5th, money is the 6th, the 2nd house from that. So those are the times to bet big. People asked before about books, and I love the Rulership book by Rex Bills. I have it next to my computer at all times, including right now. There's a really old version of it, but it gives the planetary ruler of everything. And it is alphabetical. It's also organized by signs and by planets and houses, and it's great. The Book of Rulerships by Lee Lehman, I think, is no longer in print. If you like traditional or classical astrology, it would probably be your choice, but again, it's hard to find. Houses of the Horoscope by Bill Herbst is one of my favorite books about houses. He is a really, really intelligent guy. It is still in print. It might have a different looking cover, but it's a really good book. And one that I love is Planets in Houses by Robert Pelletier. Again, I think it's in print. This is a book that is basically completely based on derivative houses. I don't think he even uses the phrase, but for example, when he writes about the 10th house, he talks about how it is connected to every other house. Or the 11th house will say, this is the house of money from career, because it's the 2nd from the 10th. Or he'll say, this is your partner's, your partner's home or whatever, the 10th house. So it's an excellent book. I can't recommend it enough. If you only got 2, I would get Planets and Houses and the Rulership book to go down this particular road. I will send you these, a download for these slides, so you will have all this information. And as I said, that little handout with all of the houses and the little keywords with them. Join my mailing list if you haven't already at bigskyAstrology.com/subscribe. I send out, messages with discounts for classes, to tell you about my latest column that I do every week and all kinds of stuff. I have my weekly podcast, the Big Sky Astrology Podcast, which comes out every Monday. And I have a couple of books you might like. The Essential Guide to Practical Astrology, which is a really comprehensive A to Z guide. It'll take you from signs of the zodiac to prediction. So I really recommend it. And I have a book on transits, astrological transits. So that
These are transits all the time.
yeah, well, you're writing my show sheets with it, bless your heart. And we can stick around for a few more minutes if people have any other questions. And otherwise, I know that you will get the recording link on Monday. So I'm having a big problem with emails not landing where they're supposed to. So if you have not gotten an email from me by Monday afternoon, my time, Pacific time, with this download link and stuff, shoot me an email. But first check your spam folder because stuff is ending up in there and all over the place. It's maddening. Any other questions? Anything in chat we need to know about?
Not many questions. A lot of people are saying thank you, and then Anna hit. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. April, this was a wonderfully informative session on derivative houses and more. Thank you very much for sharing your insightful wisdom. Stephanie, thanks for your kind help too. You're welcome. How do I pronounce your name? I feel a little bad.
I feel that way on the
Yeah, that's
podcast.
correct. Anahi.
Anna,
Anna, okay.
yay, well done, Steph.
And then Henrietta says thank you. You're getting a bunch of thank yous, and people are enjoying the class and
Oh, good.
everything else. And bring it
Good. I hope it's
I
not
appreciate
too
your clarity.
confusing. You know, I was first asked to do this topic by my local astrology group, San Diego Astrological, and I thought there's hardly a whole talk in that. And I realized there really is a lot to it. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you get stuck with anything or confused, you'll have the recording, but also email me and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
And April, I mean, not April, but Elliot has her hand raised.
Elliot, yes.
Will you do your 2025 yearly forecast? Because I just love those. And next year is so hot.
It is so hot. Thank you so much. Yes, I'll be doing that in December. I think it's going to be on December, the first Saturday in December. I think Steph and I were talking about it, but now I don't remember. It is going to be on December 7th, a day that will live in infamy. And that will be at 11:30. We're going to start a weird time, but that looked good. I like the chart for that. So stay tuned and that'll be in my mailings. Thank you for the vote of confidence. I like doing those as well. And next year is crazy.
Henrietta just asked, will the replay be on Thinkific? I can't even say that word right now.
I'm thinking I will put it there. And I've hesitated to because I hate to make people sign up for another service, but it's such a handier format. So I think I will probably do that. And when I send out the mailing, I'll just give people instructions on how to sign. You sign up for a free account. It's not like you have to pay for it, but I think it will probably work better. I haven't put
So it
anything
says
on
that
there in a long time.
Thinkific always blocks her.
They blocked something?
Yeah, Thinkific. Melissa says that Thinkific always blocks me.
Yeah, there's a couple of groups and other astrologers I listen to, and I can't get past their firewall, whatever it is, they don't like me. And I'm working on a computer, and
Well,
it's
that's
just
weird.
it's glitchy. I know other
I've
people.
never had a problem with it. But in
Yeah.
fact, that's why I chose it because I found other ones were a pain. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And if I have to,
Yeah.
I'll just send you a link to a full video on Vimeo. But I like to use that because it's an easy place to put things that people can always go back to it. It's got the handouts, it's got all of that stuff, and it's got the
Yeah.
So it's nice to do it, but
Yeah, I guess I've tried to buy courses that
Mhm.
were on the Thinkific thing.
Yeah.
And I just emailed the person and they sent me a link. So it's no big deal, but
Yeah, you won't need to pay for it, of course, through Thinkific. I can understand if that
Right.
gives you problems, but it's just
Yeah.
setting up a free account so you can go in and look at the class. So I think I
Good.
probably will do it that way. All right.
Elliot asks, would derivatives work on solar return charts?
Probably. Haven't tried it. Why not
Right.
try it? You know, if you're looking at your solar return chart and wanting to know the year ahead, you know, for your spouse or whatever, I suppose you could use it that way. Try it, because I haven't, and I don't know of anybody who's talked about doing it off the top of my head. So,
And Emily wants to see on YouTube.
Yes, I'm gonna be doing, I think for the Scorpio new moon, I'm gonna try to do something for podcast donors, and I think you're in that group, Emily. So you'll be seeing that. Frankly, I decided to get my feet wet with YouTube with people I know, like the podcast owners who already like me. So that it's a little less stressful because getting all of the technical part of it sorted out has been a little bit challenging, but I think I'm there now. So look for that. That will come up in a reading before the Scorpio new moon. And we'll do that. But yeah, I want to do a lot of YouTube actually, but I have to figure out how to make it happen. I'm doing the podcast and my column and these classes and clients, and something's got to give. I'm just the one person. So
Should I go ahead and stop the recording now?
I think so. Thank you.